Well, we now have a viewer, so the person watching, feel free to ask us questions and we will try to answer them, so long as they're pertaining to writing, somewhat educated, and not, well, it can be a little silly if you want it, but something pertaining to the interview. You're talking about world building and also about doing story in a video game. And
Hmm.
I would think that that's actually a lot closer to what you need to do for a comic book versus what you need to do for a novel. Because with a comic book, you've got to balance art design and dialogue, as well as some narrative elements together to try to build the immersion of the story. Writers, we have to do it with our words and how we present those words. It's a big challenge. There's pros and cons to both comic books and novels in how to do these immersion. It's basically apples and oranges, if you will. With video games, I think it's very similar to comic book that you have the art design, you also have the dialogue and some of the narrative elements, but then you also have the ambiance, you have the music, you have everything coming together to try to build immersion. And that's why, collaborative is so important for game design versus being able to do a comic book. Technically, you could do that on your own, and you've definitely proved that you can do that on your own. But it makes it a harder challenge because you have to bring so many different elements together, but not as much as game design has to. So, but I also wanted to touch on the world building element that um, I think world building is probably one of the most important things to writing a story. Now, if you're writing basically a fiction story that exists in our world, you don't need to do that much, and you can really just get away with like character building or plot building. You don't really have to do a whole lot of the world building because we live in this world, we know what it's like. But doing a speculative fiction, fantasy, science fiction novel, world building is so much more important then, even if the elements that you create don't make it into the book. I think there's a certain confidence that the writer has when they write, when they know what's behind that door. Even though the characters don't open it, they know what's behind that door. They know what the growing season is. They know what the weather's going to be like tomorrow based on geographic locations. And I really do think that there's like this confidence a writer has when they are the biggest fans of their own work, where they figure out, as you say, the math of it all. Is it crucial to be successful to do world building? I would have to say no on that one, but I think it enhances writing.
I would definitely agree. When it comes to speculative fiction, I haven't written that much. And what I have written has mostly been like in outline form. Um, but it tends to be, I'll go and just do a lot of research, read magazine articles, and it's almost like I try to think of it as taking what we already what we already know and feel comfortable with, and saying, all right, well, let's go one step beyond that. What if we extrapolate that? Sci-fi is usually my most enjoyable experiences with sci-fi are just playing one big game of what if, you know, and just following the fact on the steps that it takes us. Um, I've seen people that have done world building, like have had binders and binders of documents that describe the world fully for like, 48-page comic story, and it's not even necessarily that they're going to come back and tell more stories before. It's just they felt like they needed to flush out, understand every angle and every aspect of that world. And I feel like I definitely agree with you that it makes the world stronger. It's just a matter of not going down the the research rabbit hole is tricky because it can fool us into thinking we're writing, and we're not, right? And a lot of it, I mean, research. I think research is fun. I like reading about things that I don't know about. You know, I think it's really interesting to me. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes novels I really enjoy are novels that are things that are very far from my experience. I've never, thought about, you know, writing before. Just seeing like access to a different world. Um, but that thing of just sitting there, you can research to death. There's always more information out there. There's always more data on it. And when we talk about stuff like history, there's subjective points of view on it. And sometimes the subjective point of views may cause you to rethink your narrative and say, well, wait a minute, what if we tell this story from the underdog's perspective? They're telling it from the side that won. You know, and you made it turning your own narrative on its head. So there's still, worth in going deep into those things. But I think it's a balance of figuring out how much research you need to do to tell the story that you need to do. And then from there, saying, all right, and what else? And maybe doing another 25% beyond that, just for flowering, for details, for filling out little details that you wouldn't necessarily know. I remember there was a radio show I used to listen to. I think it was like This Week in Media. It's not a show that exists anymore. But one of the things one of the hosts would say is like they'd be watching a special or like I don't know, it was like a film that had something about firemen on it, and the guy who had a brother who was a fireman, he's like, oh wait, that's not what really happens. But everything else that we see like in the news, like you're watching a news story, you see them talking facts about like firemen or EMT workers, or something about a military project, something scientific, and someone who's well versed in that will point out all of the flaws and everything that's wrong about it. But for someone who isn't well versed, just like, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know that. And then you go and you find out, but we think that just the one thing that we know about is the one thing that they're wrong about, and not necessarily the but we don't necessarily take into account the fact that whatever particular topic they're talking about, somebody is sitting there saying, wait, that's complete BS. They don't know all the things that they should know about that. Like, for instance, I didn't know until I was an interview with somebody who was a thriller author who, was an ex-policeman. And he was talking about the fact, like, all those scenes they have in movies where people are fighting with guns, get to the point where they're, like, shooting, and they get to the point where they're click, they're out of bullets. And that just infuriated the cop every time he saw that, because he said that you have to account for every single bullet that you fire. You always have a running count in your head. You know exactly what's in your magazine at all given times, whether you're using a handgun or an automatic weapon. And you're never going to get to that point where you're like, click. You're thinking, because your life depends on knowing how many shots you have left, and when you need to switch out that magazine, if you have time, like you might just have 2 bullets left, but if you're in a situation you have time to do it, you're going to switch out a fresh magazine just so you'll have more bullets for whatever's coming next. And think about how many times for years we've seen that trope of like the click to show that they're out of bullets, and
Well, I'm kind of thinking of Futurama, one of the newer seasons, where Fry is trying to become part of the police force, and he starts shooting his gun and then runs out of bullets, so he throws the gun and hits the bullseye. So we had one viewer for a brief moment, and they actually asked us a question, and now they're gone. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the question anyways, and hope they watch it later. Okay. This comes from Thug Stammy. I don't know if that's pronounced in a different way. Someone that was from Iran was commenting earlier on the page itself, so I don't know if it's the same person because it was written in their language. So the question is, can you tell me any movie to see? I don't know if that's necessarily in relation to comic books or your style of writing or just writing in general. But you have an answer to that?
Well, I'll say just last night, my girlfriend and I watched the Lego movie, and I have to tell you, I enjoyed it. But I specifically watched it because other other creative people I know have recommended it as a great film. So I was like, I'll put this on a list of stuff to check out, and I watched it, and I enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to. But what was really interesting is that it starts off, it's weird and it's quirky because it's in a world full of Legos. They do a good job of balancing that quirky humor. Like, it's not even the Bugs Bunny type humor where there's dirty jokes that kids are going to get. It's just quirky humor that's going to appeal to both children and adults. I would be fine with some dirty humor slipped in.
Sorry.
But what I found really interesting is that as you get deeper and deeper into the movie, it just gets weirder and weirder in a very Charlie Kaufman-esque type way. Like, it becomes you would think that just a movie about cartoon Legos is already kind of surreal. But the shit gets weird. The movie just gets weird. That's all I can say is that it gets really weird. But I'm watching it and it's like, it reminds me a lot of like what's the Charlie Kaufman movie that I'm thinking of? Being John Malkovich. Like, at a point where you feel like the laws of reality start breaking down, but it's already a world that is surrealistic. Well, it's completely unrealistic. Well, they're Legos, but they set up these. It's what they do is they set up these laws for how the world operates. Now, instead of being poorly written, where they're just breaking the laws, it's more like they set the laws the world operates by, and then they begin to deconstruct them, like they're tearing apart reality. And I was sitting there watching. I'm like, this is fascinating. Like, I just as a storytelling experiment of watching it, I was like, they're rewriting the logic of their world as we're watching it in a way that you can see how they got to this path. They're carrying you down narratively, but it's like the movie just starts turning in on itself, like some weird serpent eating its tail, and. And where it ends up, it's like, it's obvious when you get to the end, but that's the best. Those are the best endings, when you get to the end and it's so obvious. But it's not like they pulled some sort of weird M. Night Shyamalan twist. It's just, it gets to an obvious conclusion that if you thought about it for a second, it makes complete sense. But you're so entrenched in the world, and the world is so rich, that you weren't looking for that. You're still on the ride. So have you seen the Lego movie?
Yes, actually I have, and I'm glad to be able to talk to someone else who has, because I made a realization about the film, and I haven't been able to say it to anyone else, that I think makes the film a little bit more deeper than it actually appears. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to spoil it, so, go ahead and mute right now if no one wants to hear the spoiler. Mm-hmm. But there's something at the very beginning of the film that's sort of touched on, but it's never really addressed later in the film. I think it is, but you kind of have to put like a lot of different things together. Because at the very beginning of the film, the Will Ferrell character is basically saying that he wants to like drastically change the world. And then, it's like 8 years later, things are moving that direction, and I'm like, what caused this sudden change? If we realize that Will Ferrell's human character is the one who really designed all of this, what was this change? And what I think it is, and this is the story part of my mind going off, is that, he was this like person who played with Legos, but then when he learned that he was going to have a son, he's like, you know what? I've got to start taking my life a lot more seriously. And that's where this drastic change came from. That was no longer about building and rebuilding. It was just about building and keeping things the way they were. And I think that there's this like undercurrent throughout the whole film about that, but it's never readdressed again. And you kind of have to like look at it in a new light to really see that. And I'm just wondering if anyone else ever saw that.
You know, I didn't think about the 8.5 years um, later part. But now that you say it, I'm like, that obviously makes complete sense. And it makes sense that anyone, you know, becoming a parent would go through that reaction of, well, I need to create order and structure now to stay cool for my family. So what was play for him still remained play, but he didn't even play it in a fun way anymore. He played it in an orderly way. You know. So no, I think your assessment is dead on, and I'm glad you reminded me of that little part in the beginning, that little card about the time shift. I didn't think about the time shift at all. Very precise. I think it's a very precise reading, and that's exactly what I think they said. So yeah, I thought it was a very deep movie. It's still fresh. I just saw it last night. And yeah, so that's one movie that um, that the other viewer that they asked, that's one movie I would definitely recommend. Um,
For me, if I were to recommend, there's so many movies, and I'm constantly watching movies, things that I've seen before, things. I talk about Misery, and that's a great movie. But I think if you want a good movie for character building, I think one of my favorite movies for that is Space Cowboys. You ever see that?
I have not. I'm familiar with it, but I've never seen it.
Oh, it's a fantastic film. And one of the challenges in the film is that these four characters, Clint Eastwood, Tommy Lee Jones, God, I can't remember the other two. Not Robert Redford. Anyways, the challenge that they have to create is that these four people knew each other in the past, haven't seen each other for over 40 years, and are reconnecting, and they've got to kind of tell a story about what happened for the reason why they haven't spoken to each other in 40 years, at the same time of telling a story about something bad happening. And I think it's a very good character building movie, and I'd recommend anyone watching this film. It's corny in a lot of places, like the science doesn't exactly add up in some places, but if you just go in there like getting the great adventure of these four fantastic actors just feeding off of each other and building up their characters, I think it's a fantastic film.
I think I'll definitely have to put that one on the list to check out. It's one of those that I just never got around to seeing when it came out. But I mean, that group of actors are always. It's James Garner with the other astronaut.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's one of those movies that it looked good, just never got around to.
Donald Sutherland was the fourth one.
Have you seen the HBO series True Detective?
Which one?
True Detective.
No, I don't have HBO, so I don't get to watch it.
Well, when it comes out on DVD, if you're able to make time to see it, it's well worth it. The whole thing is crime as character study. Like it starts off in the territory of sort of like The Wire, but then goes into like a very poetic, esoteric zone, with at the same time having meditations on crime and evil and humanity and motivations, what our basic human drives are. It's like a very philosophical crime story in a great way. And it also is another story that has a large time jump in it, where it jumps back and forth between the characters in the modern day and the characters, the investigation they're working on like a decade ago. And seeing how they've transformed and why they've transformed and how you wonder what has strained their relationship, and just seeing how all the pieces of their lives unfold. At a certain point, you actually, the crime is what starts it, and the crime is what ends it, but everything in between, it's all character. It's just like one big character burger. Like you just want to bite into just juicy, rich character moments and character study. It's fantastic.
All right, so we've kind of gotten off the beaten path here, which is okay, but I mean, we do have a time limit of 6 hours, so we probably should hurry this along. Actually, we can actually record for up to 8 hours and I'll upload it to YouTube. I just think that's so amazing. Not that I intend to ever do a video that long, but you know.
You have a marathon session.
I'm hoping to. I'm hoping in the near future to do something like that.
We can do like a writers roundtable.
Well, I am hoping to set something like that up, and I was going to wait till the end of the interview to do that, but if I am ever able to do it, I definitely would like you there. I think you'd have a lot to add to the table.
Yeah, I'd be up for it. Sounds awesome.
All right, so we were talking before about Eye of the Gods. What is Eye of the Gods about?
Well, Eye of the Gods is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with the ability of remote viewing. He has visions where he can look through other people's eyes. He can see what they're seeing, but unfortunately he can't control it. Witnesses a murder in one of these visions, only to find out it's been reported in the news as a death by natural causes. So there's a conspiracy and a cover-up going on, and the deeper he gets into it, he eventually realizes the people behind this conspiracy are the same ones that are triggering his visions. He doesn't know how, he doesn't know why. All he knows is that if he doesn't figure it out, they're going to kill him if they're going to see. So.
Okay, so you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to go ahead and ask this specifically. That as you're basically doing your writing as full time, and also your day job as well. But as a graphic novelist, you have to both do art and story at the same time. You're kind of like the one-man show, and I've seen some of your work, and unfortunately, I'm not a comic book fan. And, I appreciate the stories that go into them. I envy the artists being able to draw, but I don't get immersed in them because I want to know all the details that you get from a novel that you don't really get from a. But I'm kind of blabbing right now. How do you balance between the art and the story, and how do you make the proper balance of the two?
Well, I'd say that it is the answer to that is the same with any form of writing, which is what does the story need? It's listening to the story and being aware that there's parts where the art needs to take the lead. There's going to be parts where the writing needs to take the lead. There's going to be parts where different aspects of the writing take the lead. There's going to have to be parts where they're going to have to be married in a very poetic way. And it's a matter of creating, once you create your first draft, you have your basic structure, it's then listening to the story and saying, all right, where does it feel weak? Where does it want to be visually more bold? Where do we want to have some character moments to be told with just visuals? Where do we have character moments that, honestly, you can do a whole scene where you've got a character having an interesting conversation, have the characters all in silhouette, just going back and forth between one silhouette and another, just having them talking, and to really put the artwork into the background. Or even just put a block of text in the middle of a comic page. That's the beauty of the mediums that gives you flexibility to go strongly in either direction. And I've seen comic books where you'll have a lot of, normal comic book panel layouts, and you'll have one page that's all dialogue with the page facing it being one standalone image, almost like an illustrated prose novel. Or having an image that's running down the length of the page with a sidebar of text going along with it also. There's flexibility to play with that design and push it wherever it needs to be. But in the end, the answer to that question is what the story wants. And it's not something that can be, because it's going to be different for every story. So it's learning how to be sensitive to that, be aware of that, and listen to it. And also, there's the fact that as the author of the story, a person can push it in one direction or the other. I mean, you can make the story more visually driven, and it doesn't mean it's going to be a worse story or a better story. It means it's going to be a different version of that. You can rely more heavily on the visuals with the same basic plot, the events that you're going to do with the same characters, or you can have the entire book where the visuals really aren't particularly flashy, and it's really all about the writing. You can still tell a story that's a compelling story. So it's not just a matter of what the story wants, but also being aware that you can make it different. It doesn't necessarily make it better or worse.
Yeah, something that I'm starting to realize in this, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to learn this, is that even though comic books and novelization are two different mediums or medias, there really is no difference between you and me as far as the technical stuff goes or the artistic stuff goes. I mean, yeah, you're drawing pictures, but so am I. Yeah, I'm actually writing words, but then so are you. There really is no difference between a novelist and a comic book artist or a comic book creator when you really get down to it. They're essentially doing the exact same thing, and I'm learning this now because I've always looked at it with the bias as well. Comic books is something else, but I'm starting to question that. I'm starting to see that there really is no difference.
Have you ever read? I know you're not a comic fan. Have you ever read Alan Moore's Watchmen?
I've heard about Watchmen. I haven't seen the movie either, but no, I haven't read the comics, but I've heard great things about it.
Well, the reason why I ask is because The Watchmen is probably one of the most novelistic comic books I've ever read. Like, it really feels like you're reading. Aside from just the actual length of it, it's a pretty good sized book. It's like 12 complications long, but it's very deep, very rich. It takes place over a long tapestry of time, and there's a lot of character study in the book. There's a reason why it's as lauded as it is. I think that there's certain or Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns that always get pulled out when people talk about great comic books. But the reason for those books getting referenced is because I think they show what the medium can be at its strongest. So I think there are a lot of comics that really are that don't necessarily live up to the aspirations that would draw in someone, regardless of whether they were a fan of novels versus comics. Like there's Watchmen is one of those books that I think breaks genre and boundaries. That's the reason why so many people love it. And if every comic were that good, then everyone would read comics. Not exclusively, but everyone would consume comics to the same degree that they consume prose in television and film. But not every book can, execution-wise, end up being that great. But the Watchmen, I think, is one of those that you could definitely, if you ever felt like you wanted to see, what are some other things that that might draw me in, that are very interesting in terms of what they do narratively. There's another comic book that I think is pretty interesting. There's a popular comic book writer, Grant Morrison, and there's a lot of books you can pick from Grant Morrison that are great, but there's one called Arkham Asylum, and it's a Batman story. And it's about the inmates in Arkham Asylum taking over the asylum, and they basically tell the police they're going to kill, the people they have inside one by one, unless they send Batman in as their prison. And so Batman basically goes into the prison of his own free will and is put on trial by the criminals in there. And the art style plays a big part in how, the story is great. The art style is also very deeply psychological and dark, and it's not what you would typically. It's stuff you would expect to see more in a fine art gallery than you would necessarily the clean line, typical superhero artwork. It's very, very different, very painterly. Also mixed with a lot of photography and mixed media. But that book is another one that has some deep character studies to it. I mean, I could sit and think, I could rattle off a list, and I'm not going to, but I could just think, I could sit and think, what are some books? I could make a list. Graphic novels for novelists. But I think that
I'll tell you what, if you bring that list together, I will post it on my blog.
All right, done and done.
If you want to make it a little bit more of an article and give maybe a little explanation for each one, I think that that would be a perfect article on my blog.
No, definitely. I will do so. Deal.
And then that way, all the novelists who come to mine get to know who you are. Well, other than this interview, of course. I don't think anyone actually watches these, but I'm hoping that as I do them more and more, people will come back and it's like, oh, this guy is great. I should go check out his work.
Well, you know, I mean, a lot of the stuff, I have a YouTube channel where I actually film, I put my phone above my drawing table, and I just film while I'm actually making comics. And then when I'm done with it, it's time-lapse, and then I just will record a little bit of dialogue about, sometimes it's about what I was thinking while I was working on that page, sometimes it's about just my general thoughts on creativity or art, or just whatever's on my mind. They're not necessarily specific to the actual thing I'm drawing all the time. But it took a long time in posting a lot of those before people started watching regularly. And then I found that something that I may have posted a year ago, someone has gone back and found now, and that particular video will get shared a lot. And even though there were not many views when I first put it out, that's kind of the beauty, I think, of the digital landscape, is that we don't know what kind of life these things are going to take on once we create them. So, much like writing a novel, we create this thing, we want to give it as much life as we can, and we release it to the world, and it goes, it flies, it grows, and where it ends up, hopefully someplace worth it.
Well, I want to, touch on something you're saying, and this is something that if I were ever to give a talk on, being an indie writer, this is something that I think everyone should know because of a recent success that I've had. Now, I believe I showed you my map designs, right?
Yeah.
Well, someone at Comic-Con made this really great suggestion to me, and it was a writer who did this. Because I'm up to like 12 articles right now with my world building map making series. At the time I was only at 10, and a writer told me that I should go on to Reddit and join the world building community there, and I did. And oh my god, it's just so amazing that I put my work on there. I'm like, well, here's a link to my webpage, and it just took off. I broke 5 different viewing records in the month of June alone. Most views in a single day, most views in a single month. In fact, I reported on June 29th that I finally reached the 3,000 mark for total views, and I'm just about to hit the 4,000 mark now. And that just blows my mind because I got 1,600 views in the month of June, and prior to that, I was lucky to get 300 a month. And it was a long time before anyone paid any attention to my world building series. But even if I started on Reddit right away and it's like, hey, here's an article I've done, if I only just did the one article, no one would have really cared. It's like, it's one article, it'll probably fizzle out itself. But you got to keep working at it. You got to keep adding to it. Success is not going to happen right away for you. Some people it does, but the majority it doesn't. And especially as a novelist doing indie writing, you've got to show that there are a lot of books that people can find out about you. The more you produce, the more people are going to want to read you. And if they read one book, then there's a good chance they'll read another book. And I think that, I already knew that when going into this, and I knew that it could be a year before anyone found any value of my series, but I knew that people would find value in it for what I was doing. And I didn't get discouraged. Well, maybe I did a little bit, but I kept at it when no one was viewing it. Like I post up an article and I maybe get 2 views a day for that day of posting it. And now I'll probably be known for my map making skills before I'm ever known for writing, but I'm okay with that for right now. Whatever draws attention to me to eventually get to my writing, but you just gotta keep at it, and especially with this video series, yeah, no one's really paying attention to it. That doesn't mean a year from now people won't be paying attention to it. And people trying to have me interview them because, God, what? It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of another source, but Playboy is the one that keeps coming up for me. But that, I think if I ever got a story published in Playboy, I think that would be definitive proof that I'm a writer, a sci-fi writer, because only the best get a story published in Playboy. And, I don't think I'm there yet, but I hope one day I am, and who knows, maybe me interviewing people leads to people getting success. I don't know, but I've got to keep trying. I got to keep with it if I truly believe in something.
I completely agree. I think for a lot of people, the hardest part is sticking with it, because there's a soul attrition that happens over the number of years of doing work without getting some sort of recognition for it. Not even wealth, fame, or any of that. Just some sort of someone giving a shit that you do something. There was somebody I met at the Phoenix Comic Con I did the Las Vegas Comic Con, amazing Las Vegas Comic Con, a couple weeks ago. And there was a guy I met the year before at the show, and he told me, he came by specifically because he wanted to tell me that a conversation we had, he not given up, but just he hadn't stayed consistent with his own writing. And the conversation we had inspired him to get back to writing his own work again. He's hard at work at it now. He just wanted to tell me that. And the idea that I could inspire somebody else to follow their passion is pretty mind-blowing to me, because I don't feel like I don't think I've published like a body of work yet. I've got one graphic novel. I've got a current comic book series I'm working on. I haven't been put up with any major publishers. It's not like it's this work of genius. It's just me trying to tell the best stories I can. But the fact that the human connection, just the fact that like when we met, in Phoenix, we were like just, hanging out talking like as two creatives to each other, and we're like, well, let's, figured staying in touch, and having an interview and having this conversation. The idea of being able to connect with another human being and motivate them to express their creativity, that alone is the kind of recognition that will keep me going, knowing that I know that there's times, I don't think I've ever wanted to give up, but there's definitely times where the slog wears on me. The thing that keeps me going is that I actually enjoy the process of creating. It's everything else that it takes to get it out into the world that's difficult. And one could say, well, if that's all you care about, then just make it and just, make it for you, and you don't need to share it with anybody. Just put it online for free. What stops me from that is that I'm only able to do it if I'm lucky, an hour a day because of my day job. That's the tough thing. It doesn't allow me to put out my comics as quickly as I'd like. And chasing the idea of doing it as a profession, trying to actually make money from it, to me, that seems like it's a means to an end. That if I can stretch it from spending 1 hour a day making comics to 4 hours a day making comics, then to me that's a win. Like if I have to spend 4 hours a day, if I can spend 4 hours a day being creative and then another 4 hours a day doing marketing and business stuff that I'm not that interested in, but doing that so that allows me to spend a larger chunk of my day than just that 1 hour a day, that's how much I love making comics. I'll pursue it just for that. The idea of being able to spend like a whole like work day, 3 or 5 days a week, just writing and drawing, to me that sounds fantastic. And again, you could say, well, then why don't you pursue working for Marvel or DC or Dark Horse or IDW? Well, that's when my control freak comes back out and says, well, I kind of want to make what I want to make. And when you're working for those corporations, I would be lucky, very, very fortunate to have that kind of opportunity. But it's not where my passion lies. I like Spider-Man, but I'm not passionate about writing or drawing up a Spider-Man story. I think it would be a really cool opportunity. I'd really enjoy it. But in the long run, my passions lie with the characters that I'm thinking of, and we've already got more outlines for stories than I'll have time to write before I die. About a decade ago, I started a folder, and here's my an idea, whether it was just a sentence or like a whole 5-page outline for a book. I would just write it, add to the folder, and at this point, if I were to sort through it, only about 25% of it I think it's really publishable, and there's probably maybe another 50% that I would need to really work on and build it up to make it a good, solid story if I were to revise it and dig in. But even just that 25% that I've got, that's keep me busy till I die. So
I actually do the same thing as well, as far as, when I get up and get an idea for something, I will put it into a folder. I'll put it in its own special folder, and then idea folder I have. That's mostly because I have an extremely bad memory due to my condition, and I'm going to forget. And these are great ideas. I don't want to forget them. But, something earlier talking about having that kind of inspiration that, that you're able to inspire other people. I sort of had a similar experience a few days ago, because even though I posted my stuff on Reddit and I posted in a couple different places, I'm still actively there offering my expertise and, trying to help people with any questions they have about the process. Even if it's for something completely different than what I'm capable of doing, I still try to provide some sort of insight. But I saw an article where a person's like, I've designed this very basic outline of map, what do I do next? And I like to read through the comments before I make any sort of posts. That way I don't, step on anyone else's toes who's trying to help. I don't want to undermine people, even though technically posting my link to article will sometimes do that. And in the article, someone's like, check out this person's world building series, and it was mine, and I'm like, whoa, someone else is referencing my work? And it blew my mind. It's such a small thing, but for me it was the biggest thing, the biggest act of recognition for what I've done. Well, other than getting 300 views in a single day.
But so, that's the kind of recognition, and because you're becoming an authority in your field. The fact that, like you said, the fact that you're grinding away, you're doing the interviews, you continue to add to your map building series. You're building credibility about your expertise in this topic. And most importantly, you're helping other creators. So obviously, that's why you're a valuable resource for people. So I can see how that would make your day, if not your week.
All right, so
I did have a thought I was going to share. It's just an aside. It's not an important thing.
Go ahead, man.
I, as a visual artist, actually sometimes I will come with an idea for a painting, something that's not necessarily directly related to my comic stuff. And sometimes I'll do a quick sketch, but if I know I'm not going to have time to draw it right away, I will actually sit down and I'll write a quick paragraph or two describing the image. So I will use writing to take notes for a painting. Because the picture in my head is very, very clear, but it would take me maybe 20 minutes of sketching to write down all the details. However, I can describe it in words in 5 minutes. So I actually also have a Word document on my computer called Art Ideas. And it's literally ideas for paintings, but it's just me describing the painting in verbal detail. And I just like list all the stuff I see in my head. And I can do that in 5 minutes, whereas instead of spending 20 minutes sketching it. And that's something I also use as a time saver, which I think that is one of those weird writer-artist things. But that's something that only, I think, a writer-artist would probably choose to do.
That's interesting. I do the same thing only because I can't really draw, and I work on a visual. I do writing all the time, but I don't know. I don't know. It surprises me, and I can't really explain why. Probably because you're a visual person. I would expect you to do things visually, but to do things on a technical level, it doesn't surprise me that you do it. It's just surprised me that a visual person takes that approach, and I think it's very cool.
Well, I mean, that's one of the odd challenges of being, within the comic book industry. Usually, a comic book writer, if they're working for like Marvel or DC, they're writing more than one book a month because the month that time that they have, they can write a comic book a week, or maybe write 4, 5, or 6 comic books a month. Some people will write a lot more than that if they're really prolific. But there's a time barrier for the actual visual drawing. The drawing of a comic book, there's very few artists that can draw more than 1 issue a month. It's like a handful. Very few people can do it. And it's one of those things where it's not necessarily that, I certainly don't think that writing is easier than drawing. It is simply an act that doesn't take as much time if you look at, like, for the same quantity of information that's being conveyed. You convey information much quicker through prose in the same given amount of time than you can visual art. So I almost look at it like, if I need to get an idea down and get information down, I'm going to use whatever is going to allow me to get it down as quickly and as efficiently. Again, it's not like I wouldn't want to be a prose author. The only thing that would stop me is that I would miss drawing so much. Like, for me, it simply comes down to I love writing and I love drawing, and I would not forsake one for the other. That's why I am what I am and why I do what I am. It's not that I certainly have any opinion of one being a higher craft over the other. I generally have a worldview that all forms of expression, literature, film, music, poetry, painting, sculpture, all of them, they're forms of telepathy. They're taking something that's inside your head, creating a physical vessel for what that idea is, so someone else can view or experience that vessel and then take the idea into their head. And there's just a transformation that happens while doing it, but that's what creativity is in all of its forms. So I've got a pretty broad, holistic idea of what quote unquote art is.
And that actually ties into our next question is, what is your creation process? How do you go from an idea in your head? How do you get the idea, what inspires you to actually put it on paper? I mean, you've explained some of the process, doing the thumbnails and all of that, but what's the beginning that leads you to the end?
So you're saying more of the kernel of the actual story? Or are you talking about, because it really comes down to that whole question of where creative people get their ideas from. It's that you get it from everywhere around you. Whether it's a film that I saw, I don't know, butterfly flying past my window. So these ideas come from everywhere. That's really what it is you could literally, if someone were in tuned and focused enough, they could just be generating story ideas 24 hours a day simply by opening their eyes to the world and taking everything. Well, what's the story about this? What's the story about that? What's the story about this guy who crossed the street in front of me? What's the story about the person who made his can? What's the story about that car that's parked across the street? What's the story about what's going on in that restaurant that it's parked in front of? You can literally just generate stories non-stop. From anything. It's just a matter of where something strikes you. In terms of my process, From there, it starts with sculpting the idea I'm going to build the narrative around. That idea of building the bridge from the ground up, as opposed to the gangplank out into the distance. For instance, the current series I'm working on, Morningstar. Morningstar is Lucifer's fall from heaven, told as a western. Where that story came from? I was at the San Diego Comic-Con many years ago, and while I was waiting for a portfolio review, I was just sitting around just drawing in my sketchbook. I had already walked the floor a bunch of times, was kind of exhausted, so I was just sitting down in the food area drawing. And I don't know why I drew it, but I drew a cowboy with a shotgun, and then just drew angel wings on it. I don't know why. And from there I thought, there is a story about a western dealing with fallen angels. After that, the story has taken many forms. I mean, I actually, oddly enough, like I said, I recently moved. When I was unpacking my boxes, I was flipping through a bunch of old sketchbooks, and I found the very first version of Morningstar that I ever drew in a sketchbook. Like the first issue, basically. And I actually showed it to my girlfriend. She's like, look at this, because it's so different from the story that I'm doing now. But what it is I basically sit there and I start sculpting the story both visually and in terms of literarily. That's what a lot of artists will have a sketchbook that they make, or just character sketches or a notebook they make when they're starting a new series and sort of building craft when they're doing the world building for that story. Because I'll start by just doodling freeform, just drawing characters, ideas, seeing what comes up with me, like what visually seems like it fits in with the vein of this world. And as I'm doing those sketches, story ideas start popping up in my head. Oh, these are the characters I want to deal with. I want to add this character, I want to add that character. And as I do them, I'll go back and I'll do a little bit of writing. I go and I write, flesh out some character ideas. Some ideas are kind of from the plot line, certain scenes that I want to tell, and then I go back and I do more sketching based on that, and then the sketches become more specific to the outline. And basically, I go back and forth between writing and drawing and writing and drawing, adding it. Like I'm building this clay, like not clay physically, but a mental clay maquette of what my narrative is going to be, and that maquette is made of words and pictures, which is what comics are. And I end up, I think that I might be out of them. I don't think I have any more, but I originally made a Morningstar sketchbook that I published before I put up the first issue. And it just has a lot of writing about the world and the characters and what I was thinking when I was developing and designing them. And it's just writing mixed with sketches of early forms of the characters. And what's funny about that sketchbook is one of the characters, there's 7 archangels that are like the defenders of heaven. They're kind of like the Magnificent Seven. In the sketchbook, one of those characters, one of those archangels, is not in it's not in the series. He appears in the first issue, but what happens is he actually dies, and the character that was going to be his wife in the story actually steps into his role as the archangel, simply because I wanted there to be more females in this team of archangels. I didn't want it to be like just a dude fest, and there were already 2 female characters, but then I added a 3rd one, and her role in the story, she's actually become one of my favorite characters in the whole series now. And that was one of those things where, just in terms of writing and the structure, I'll tell you this is the way that how that character came about becoming more prominent. I like romance in my stories. I do like there to be sexual tension, to be some sort of love interest, and some sort of interaction that characters have. That's something I like. I think I got it from watching Ron Howard's Willow as a kid. For some reason, it was a great fantasy movie, but at the heart, it had a great love story in it. So, not all guys, shy away from love stories. I love a good love story with all my action. I love a good love story with my explosions and dragons. So, I thought that I wanted Lucifer to have a love interest. But I didn't want her to be a character who was just there, just for him to make goo eyes at and to make out and hook up with. I wanted every character in the story, regardless of gender, to have motivation and a background and feel like a real person. So I started thinking, like, I ended up taking the character that was originally going to be his love interest and combining it with. I thought to myself, I don't want to create a whole other character. I've already got 7 main characters. It's hard for a second-time graphic novelist to juggle. So that why don't I actually try? Can I make this character one of the archangels? And then I thought, well, why don't I take this other character that I had, who's going to have one role, and say, well, what if I merge their personalities, but make it now this female character, who ended up being the widow, who she takes on the role of her dead husband, and she hates these creatures that they're fighting against because they killed her husband and the father of her child. And in making her the person that I did, the romantic element between her and Lucifer is almost non-existent because she's become a rich, full character. She's a person now. There's still some tension there, but that tension is more between her and some other characters. It isn't necessarily even about Lucifer anymore. But that, again, is one of those situations where the character was telling me what they wanted, and once she became a real person to me, the whole reason I even created her, she wasn't even serving that purpose anymore, but she was serving an even higher purpose in the story. And that made me very happy. So, that's a really rambling question, or answer. I don't know if that really tells you necessarily how I make what I make, but, from the writing side, writing and drawing have become interchangeable. I know that I earlier on said that the writer side of my brain and my artist side of my brain don't sort of communicate, but that's how it was in my first graphic novel, and I think as I've been working on this one, I've learned that I don't necessarily see them. It's not that I don't see them as separately anymore. I think they're just, the two sides are merging closer together. It used to be that I would write what I thought was a good story, what I wanted to read, and I would try to figure out, all right, how do I draw this, as opposed to writing something for my artist side to draw. And now what it is the writing is storytelling, and the drawing is storytelling, and they're merging closer in my mind.
I used to know so many examples of what you're describing there, of where you're taking this simplistic character that really only had one role, and as you kept that character, you ended up developing it a lot more. Not exactly what you did, but I've seen examples of that so many times over, and it's always so great when something like that happens. And it kind of goes back to, the character-driven writing as well. But one of the best examples I can think of in television is actually on DS9. They actually had a lot of characters on there that were supposed to be just one-off, one-dimensional characters that ended up adding so much more to the story. And probably my favorite character, I had a lot of favorite characters on that show, but one of my most favorite was Nog. And have you seen DS9 at all?
I've seen an episode here and there, but I think, I never watched much beyond Next Gen.
Okay. Well, the character, it's like in the first episode, he was just a Ferengi, and he was stealing, and he was your atypical Ferengi character.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about DS9 is that they really explored the Ferengi culture and really expanded on who these characters are, that they're not necessarily so one-dimensional, that there is a very complex nature to them. But Nog was interesting because he was also a child. He was a child Ferengi, and he was just a troublemaker. But then they allowed his character to join Starfleet, which sounds a little weird, but he actually fought to get that privilege to join Starfleet, and ended up becoming such a important character to all the other characters as well. And it was just such a great transformation, but it happened in a very natural way. And actually, when they hired the actor to play him, he was basically a short person, to play a child because there was another child character on there who was actually as tall as he was, who then suddenly had a growth spurt. So it's like, yeah, we didn't see that coming. So I think that's why they started developing more of the character. But he was supposed to just be kind of someone for Jake Sisko to talk to, and then it's like, well, let's do something more with the character. Mm-hmm. And I love when things like that happen, when we, just get this one-off character who becomes something magical to the story itself. And I think that was something you were describing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think there's narrative gold to be mined everywhere if you just look for it. I think that the challenge is that when we're trying to be open to letting things change and evolve and grow, that also means that we don't quite know exactly what we want in some circumstances. It's a matter of picking out, well, what are the blind alleys and what are the actual ones I'm like, oh, this really has a richness and depth to the story. And, sometimes you have to end up writing a lot more that you're not really going to use before you get the pieces you can get through and say, oh, this adds to this, and this adds to that, and this ends up, you may not have started with theme, but by the time you have the whole structure, you see in the story that there is theme to it, and you're like, oh, well, these are the elements that reinforce the theme and make it stronger and more whole. They seem like they're beautiful, brilliant nuggets that you planted all the way through, and it's really just like, now that you're done, like, oh, let me slap this here, let me slap that, and there. I was like, oh, there we go, now the puzzle's perfect.